Raag Darbari is not widely read in Delhi society, and you would be hard pressed to find anyone who had heard of it or its author at the average dinner party. The latest English novels, on the other hand, are a favorite subject for discussion. But no novel I have ever read in English come close to capturing life in ordinary northern Indian village. Whereas the smell of the earth of Uttar Pradesh emanates from every page of Raag Darbari. Its author, the retired bureaucrat Shilal Shukla, has spent a lifetime in Uttar Pradesh. His accurate observation of society and the keen sense of humor made Raag Darbari the bestseller over 30 years ago when it was first published, and are responsible for its continuing popularity whenever Hindi is read and valued. As a bookseller from Lucknow's congested Aminabad area told me, Raag Darbari sells so well because it gives an absolutely correct description of village politics and the working of government machinery. Politics and government are two main themes of the novel. Uttar Pradesh is India's most politically dominant state, and it's often said that politics is the state's main industry. Shilal Shukla describes politics at the grassroots, but much of the factionalism, nepotism, and behind-the-scene manipulations he portrays is familiar to anyone who follows even through the national press. UP's highly developed bureaucracy, the author's own main target, is satirized for its irrelevance to the common man, inefficiency and close connection with politicians. A senior official in the government of UP sought to explain away the book's appeal by saying, "You see, it's a sort of India." Yes, Minister, but Raag Darbari covers a much wider spectrum than the British television series. The title itself revealed the political emphasis of the plot. Raag Darbari is the name of one of the most difficult ragas of Indian classic music. But Shilal Shukla has taken its meaning literally. The melody of the chord in the novel, it referred to the tune sung by the courtiers of the late day local Raja, that's to say a village politician. The chord of the title is presided over by Vaidyji, a Brahmin Ayurvedic doctor who is the political mastermind of his village, Shivpalganj. The theory is set in the late 1950s, describing his struggle for political control of Shivpalganj, a fictional village typical of Rai Bareli district, southeast of Lucknow. Among the novel's other main characters are Vaidyji's elder son, the village strongman Badri wrestler, his younger son, the student leader Rupan Babu, and his nephew Ranganath, a graduate from the town. Ranganath comes to his uncle's village of Shivpalganj to recuperate from an illness, and the novel covers his period stay there. During this time, Vaidyji, who controls the local cooperative union and college, launches a bid for power over the village council and faces a stiff challenge to his dominance in the college from a group of dissident teachers backed by his main political rival in the village. When I met Shilal Shukla in the lawns of Lucknow palatial but crumbling Carlton Hotel, I asked him why the cooperative union, the village council, and the college were so important for Vaidyji to control. He replied, "They are the three key institutions in Shivpalganj because in the late 50s and early 60s, education, cooperative, and panchayats were the three main planks of the village development. The fruit of large-scale industrial project, the new temple of the Nehruvian era, had by and large not reached the village. So these three institutions were the three instruments of the change, and also the institutions which dominant caste in the village soon learned to master in order to perpetuate their control of village matters. In Raag Darbari, the main character happened to be Brahmin because in much of UP the dominant caste in village were to a large extent still are Brahmins and Thakurs. Shilal Shukla, beside being a retired member of Indian elite IAS cadre, come from the village not very dissimilar from Shivpalganj and from a conservative Brahmin family. After graduated with a BA from Allahabad University in Ancient Indian History, English Literature and Sanskrit, he drifted into government services where he was posted mainly in the areas in and around Lucknow, including Rai Bareli district. At one time, he served as district information of the state government under VP Singh, who later became the Prime Minister. I naturally drew the conclusion that Raag Darbari was largely an autobiographical work. But the author emphatically denied that it is true that I am a Brahmin, he said, but I have never been conscious of my caste when I write. Nor is caste particularly important in Raag Darbari, as it in politics then it had not become a dominant force it is today. Similar, Shivpalganj is not my village, and none of the characters are based on individuals I know. Vaidiji, for example, is a mixture of characteristics from 3 or 4 different type of people, and my being in administration did not mean I had a special insight into the way the government worked and that I wrote as a bureaucrat. In fact, I kept my political personality completely detached from my personality as an author. Whatever I described in the book, for example, the working of cooperative union, the kind of thing that was common knowledge. In fact, one of the criticism of Raag Darbari when it first appeared was that it didn't say anything new, it just described what everybody knew already. What I do have is the equipment of any author, a wealth of experience on which I draw. While Shilal Shukla relied on his experience to create his characters, the novel's episodic plot is clearly the result of the way the book was first conceived back in the 60s. Then, during relaxed lunchtime spent on the lawns of the same hotel, Shukla related 30 or 40 village tales to his friends who were themselves talented writers and journalists. The stories seemed good over beer, he told me, but insipid written down. However, his friend insisted there was something very unusual in these tales. He told me they said the stories had a natural iconoclastic attitude which was antithesis of the contemporary Hindi writing on rural life. That writing either emphasized misery and exploitation or presented an idyllic rustic picture. So Shilal Shukla created the loose plot which bound the episodes together, but the environment of rural Shivpalganj remained the element which gave the novel the most cohesion. Few of the characters at home in this environment are prone to much introspection, though most believe strongly in plain speaking. Some of the most colorful are the wrestlers who repeatedly make their appearance either caked with mud from the wrestling pit or smelling strongly on the latest mustard oil massage. I asked Shilal Shukla how close they were to reality. He replied, that sort of collective exercise of wrestling at an akhara is now virtually obsolete, but it was common in village about 50 years ago, and in the 50s and 60s there was still among vestiges of this village institution lingering in central UP. The attitude the wrestler represented is still very real, but nowadays people don't rely on straight muscle power. There are other sort of gangsterism in politics, different kind of wrestlers who rely on illicit firearms of their strength. One of the main activities of the wrestler and the other characters is imbibing bhang, the preparation of which Shilal Shukla has observed since his childhood. As he told me, although Thakurs have always taken liquor, alcohol was taboo for Brahmins and Banyas. Bhang was the only sort of special permitted intoxication and was important as measure social relaxation and entertainment. As a boy in my village, the bhang making used to sort 5 every evening. Now norms are changing as a result of close contact between towns and villages and other factors, and the people are not horrified by drinks as they once were. Shilal Shukla Shivpalganj is also strangely devoid of women. Apart from the daughter of the local moneylender who climbs over the rooftop to kiss Ranganath, women only appear as passerby or in bedtime fantasies. I asked the author whether village women were not part of his wealth of experience. Shilal Shukla replied, society in Raag Darbari is a male-dominated society, and politics is still a male-dominated field despite Indira Gandhi being the Prime Minister for so long. And all the distortions of the village that can attract satire or irony come from men in real life. For example, defecation. Very few lady politicians indulge the, for example, defections. Very few lady politicians indulge in floor crossing. So male characters are much more attractive if your aim is satirize distorted values in political life. I don't think a lady would have behaved like Vediji if she would have been in charge of college. Even the distortion Shilal Shukla sees in traditional social values seems to be male-oriented. For example, he debunked the concept of filial devotion, the great respect Indians have for their elder. Two of the characters, Chote wrestler and his father, are constantly up in arms against each other. Following a family tradition generations old. The author argues that this also represents reality, but perhaps he is unduly cynical about the social system which has given India a remarkably stable society for hundreds of years. When I put this to him, he replied, "Am I too critical? What else can you be?" And then you must bear in mind that I was writing in the mood of high comedy. It is the book's lively humor which carries the plot along and make the light of flaws in the system of which Sri Lal Shukla highlights. The political and administrative system it describes was inherited from the British to create it to run an empire. It is therefore not surprising that it becomes a straighten when asked to run a complex independent country like India. In fact, many of the system the British introduced work far from perfectly even during the Raj. A favorite target of the author are the court, which have been the cause of complaint of the common man ever since in 1850, when the administrator seems visited village in what is now UP and found people confounded by the corruption and complications of the newly introduced British legal system. The courtroom scene in Raag Darbari, starring among others the village professional witness, are some of the funniest episodes in the book. The author maintained that this humor is not unique to himself and that people of UP, especially in village, have a highly developed ability to see the funny side of the life. Their humor is reflected in the richness of local dialects. Sri Lal Shukla has written Raag Darbari using a gamut of literary style, but he has largely relied on genuinely colloquial Hindi enriched with Hindi translations of expression drawn from dialects. This is unusual. Many writers on the village life, for example, Premchand, rely heavily on dialect itself to add realism to their writing. Sri Lal Shukla's use of translated expression gives an equally authentic rural flavor to Raag Darbari. Besides presenting the reader with some startling mental pictures, for example, a person pleased with something which is in fact going to prove a nuisance is compared to man with a tree growing out of his groins, who thinks he is going to enjoy the shades. Himself is widely read in English as well as in Hindi and Sanskrit and could easily write in that languages. But he believed that only one's mother tongue will do for creative writing. He remembers the case of his uncle, a brilliant student who wrote a book in 1913 with an English preface and was roundly castigated by his misuse of a definite article. My uncle realized, he said, that it was not his native language, no matter how much he studied it, and he should not write it in it. So Sri Lal Shukla continued to write Hindi, taking long trips to hills to painstakingly draft and redraft his novels. His dry humor is still very much intact, although he is increasingly disillusioned with the way has gone since independence. That's partly because he remembered the days of independence movement when he was an idealistic student and finds contemporary realities do not measure up to his hopes. In his opinion, the values have degenerated even further since he wrote Raag Darbari, rendering his novel outdated. As he told me on the lawns of Garden Hotel in the days when I was writing that novel, were concerned about mild distortions of the system. Now, you would have to write a fantasy on the lines of Gracia Marquis to being what is going on. Raag Darbari has become quite irrelevant now. He believed that the government preference since independence has been quite dismal and points to what he sees as the virtual collapse of the cooperative movement and the fact well over half the population still illiterate on proof of that. He sees money, power and what known as the local mafia playing much larger role in politics than before, and the administration weakened by excessive political interference. Others share his views. As a Lucknow journalist remarked to me, corruption is now so accepted among politicians that it is no longer an issue. If an official accepts the set rate of bribe and doesn't ask for more, he is considered a very good, honest man. So Sri Lal Shukla appeared to be right in saying distortions in the system have increased. But the system is still the same inherited from the British Raj, and problems it faces are similar in nature to those described in Raag Darbari. The only difference is that they are bigger and will continue to grow until system is properly adapted to meet Indian needs. Therefore, I believe that Raag Darbari is still very relevant. Moreover, many of the observations the author make of everyday life in UP are clearly as accurate as they were 25 years ago. Families of domestic pigs still jostle one another and they trot down the roads. Truck drivers always park almost in the middle of the road with the cab doors wide open so that no other vehicle can pass. The groups of village women can still be seen squatting in the fields at dawn and dusk so that they can defecate with some privacy. Towards the conclusion of the novel, Vaidehi tries to re-establish his influence by approaching politicians and officials in the town, a thinly disguised Lucknow. Here, too, there are much in the description which is recognizable today. Traffic has increased, but a very large portion of it still consists of government vehicles. The most impressive being the ambassador car with flashing red light and maintained fans which blow air into the faces of ministers reclining on the rear seat. English, understood by merely 2.5% of the population, is still the natural language of the elite. The best schools are still English medium. English also continue to be the language of shops signs in Hazratganj. The bazaar originally built and for the British. Pan shops still spring out of every corner. Glasses of milky bhang can still be had, and no man ever seen sort of a place to pee. Officials and politicians still live in the greenest area of the city, away from the noise and congestion, and politicians' bungalows are still thronged by favor seekers and representatives from the various fractions as politics become more and more a business of patronage and patrons and patronage. This is not to deny that some things have changed for the better as well as for the worse. After Raag Darbari, focus on the negative aspect of the system. There are positive aspects too. For example, sections of society which were traditionally excluded from power are increasingly demanding their due share in government. At the time of writing, the chief minister UP was leader belonged to one such backward caste. It's another matter that he was ex-wrestler and former teacher at the intermediate college. His brother headed his home district cooperative federation, a cousin that district board, providing that even the rising political power finds these local institutions as important to control as they were when Raag Darbari was written. Two of the chief minister's main programs promoting Hindi and providing latrines for women, village women, are also a necessary now as they were then. But the ultimate proof of Raag Darbari continuing relevance is in expanding readership. A second generation of Hindi readers has discovered the novel. Translation into 15 different languages have made it accessible to people all over the country. It has also been adapted for the stage and television, and now finally it has been published in English too. I have tried my best to capture the spirit of the book in this translation, and if I have, I am sure that Shilal Shukla will win his fair share of acclaim among English readers too. When the managing director of the Gamble Union of Shivpalganj left, the sub-inspector raised his head once and looked around. Everywhere was peace. The loincloth constable had been straining bhang beneath the tamarind tree was now anything a nearby Shivlingam with it. The watchman was grooming the horse haunches. A dacoit sitting in the lockup was loudly reciting prayers of the monkey god, Lord Hanuman. Just outside the gate, the constable on duty, no doubt in order to be in position to keep constant watch at night, was sleep propped up against a pillar. The sub-inspector wanted to close his eyes and dozed, but just then he saw Rupan Babu approaching. He grumbled, "You can't even shut your eyes." As Rupan Babu came in, he got up from his chair, and despite the fact that courtesy week he had long passed, he courteously shook hand. Rupan Babu sat down and immediately said, "A letter had been received by Ramadin. The dacoit have asked for 5,000 rupees It says, "Oh, the last night of the dark fortnight, bring 5,000 rupees to the southern hill." The sub-inspector smiled and said, "Really, Sahib? This is too much. In the old days, dacoits used to cross river and mountain to collect money from your home. But now they expect you to leave your home and go and deliver the money to them." Rupan Babu said, "Yes, that's what I am saying. It is not dacoity, it's just bribery." The sub-inspector continued in the same tone, "Bribery? Theft, dacoit. Now they have all become the same. It's communism." Rupan Babu said, "Further says the same thing." "What does he say?" "The same communism has taken over." They both laughed. Rupan Babu said, "No, I am not joking. Ramadan really had received this letter. That's why father has sent me here. He says so that if Ramadan is our opponent, he shouldn't be tormented like this. What he says is quite right, and whoever you want me to tell this to, I will tell it." Rupan Babu narrowed his deep-set eye and looked at the sub-inspector. The sub-inspector stared back at him and smiled. He said, "Don't worry, you will be on the dacoit as long as I am here." "Don't worry, there will be no dacoit as long as I am here." Rupan Babu said in a mild tone of the voice, "That I know. The letter is a forgery. Just inquire your own constable. Perhaps one of them wrote it." "No, that couldn't be. My constables are illiterate. Most can't even sign their own names." Rupan Babu was about to say something more, but the sub-inspector said, What's the hurry? For now, let Ramadan file his complaint. Let him show me the letter." For a while, both were silent. Then a thought occurred to the sub-inspector. "If you were to ask me the truth, I would say it seems that this bound up with education department." "How?" "And not just the education department, with your college." Rupan Babu took this remark badly. "You are out to get my college. It appeared to me that some boy from your college has sent this letter to Ramadan. What do you think? In your eyes, students are responsible for all crime." Rupan Babu rebuked him. "If someone took poison in front of you and died, you people wouldn't even admit that was suicide. You would say that some student had poisoned him." "You are right, Rupan Babu. If it was necessary, I would even say that I am the follower of Bakhtavar Singh. Perhaps you didn't know that." After this, they started on one topic of conversation of the government servant, what government servant used to like and what they are like now. They touched on the subject of Bakhtavar Singh. The sub-inspector Bakhtavar Singh was returning home along one evening. Two badmash called Jagru and Mangru attacked him in the mango grove and beat him up. The story got out, and so Bakhtavar Singh entered a report of beating at the police station. The next day, the two badmash came and clasped his feet. They said, "Sir, you are our mother and father. If a child get angry and behaved badly with his parents, they forgive him." Bakhtavar Singh fulfilled his duty as a parent and forgave them. They filled their filial duty and made good arrangements for the Bakhtavar Singh in his old age. The matter was soon settled. When the managing director of the Gamble Union of Shivpalganj left, the sub-inspector raised his head once and looked around. Everywhere was peace. The loincloth constable had been straining bhang beneath the tamarind tree was now anything a nearby Shivlingam with it. The watchman was grooming the horse haunches. A dacoit sitting in the lockup was loudly reciting prayers of the monkey god, Lord Hanuman. Just outside the gate, the constable on duty, no doubt in order to be in position to keep constant watch at night, was asleep propped up against a pillar. The sub-inspector wanted to close his eyes and dozed, but just then he saw Rupan Babu approaching. He grumbled, "You can't even shut your eyes." As Rupan Babu came in, he got up from his chair, and despite the fact that courtesy week he had long passed, he courteously shook hands. Rupan Babu sat down and immediately said, a letter had been received by Ramadin. The dacoit have asked for 5,000 rupees. It says, oh, the last night of the dark fortnight, bring 5,000 rupees to the southern hill. The sub-inspector smiled and said, really, Sahib? This is too much. In the old days, dacoits used to cross river and mountain to collect money from your home. But now they expect you to leave your home and go and deliver the money to them. Rupan Babu said, yes, that's what I am saying. It is not dacoity, it's just bribery. The sub-inspector continued in the same tone. Bribery, theft, dacoit. Now they have all become the same. It's communism. Rupan Babu said. Further says the same thing. What does he say? The same communism has taken over. They both laughed. Rupan Babu said, no, I am not joking. Ramadin really had received this letter. That's why father has sent me here. He says so that if Ramadin is our opponent, he shouldn't be tormented like this. What he says is quite right, and whoever you want me to tell this to, I will tell it. Rupan Babu narrowed his deep-set eye and looked at the sub-inspector. The sub-inspector stared back at him and smiled. He said, don't worry, you will be on the dacoit as long as I am here. Don't worry, there will be no dacoit as long as I am here. Rupan Babu said in a mild tone of the voice, that I know. The letter is a forgery. Just inquire your own constable. Perhaps one of them wrote it. No, that couldn't be. My constables are illiterate. Most can't even sign their own names. Rupan Babu was about to say something more, but the sub-inspector said, what's the hurry? For now, let Ramadin file his complaint. Let him show me the letter. For a while, both were silent. Then a thought occurred to the sub-inspector. If you were to ask me the truth, I would say it seems that this bound up with education department. How? And not just the education department with your college. Rupan Babu took this remark badly. You are out to get my college. It appeared to me that some boy from your college has sent this letter to Ramadin. What do you think? In your eyes, students are responsible for all crime. Rupan Babu rebuked him. If someone took poison in front of you and died, you people wouldn't even admit that was suicide. You would say that some student had poisoned him. You are right, Rupan Babu. If it was necessary, I would even say that I am the follower of Bakhtavar Singh. Perhaps you didn't know that. After this, they started on one topic of conversation of the government servant, what government servant used to like and what they are like now. They touched on the subject of Bakhtavar Singh. The sub-inspector Bakhtavar Singh was returning home along one evening. Two badmash called Jagru and Mangru attacked him in the mango grove and beat him up. The story got out, and so Bakhtavar Singh entered a report of beating at the police station. The next day, the two badmash came and clasped his feet. They said, sir, you are our mother and father. If a child get angry and behaved badly with his parents, they forgive him. Bakhtavar Singh fulfilled his duty as a parent and forgave them. They filled their filial duty and made good arrangements for the Bakhtavar Singh in his old age. The matter was soon settled. When the managing director of the Gamble Union of Shivpalganj left, the sub-inspector raised his head once and looked around. Everywhere was peace. The loincloth constable had been straining bhang beneath the tamarind tree was now anything a nearby Shivlingam with it. The watchman was grooming the horse haunches. A dacoit sitting in the lockup was loudly reciting prayers of the monkey god, Lord Hanuman. Just outside the gate, the constable on duty, no doubt in order to be in position to keep constant watch at night, was asleep propped up against a pillar. The sub-inspector wanted to close his eyes and dozed, but just then he saw Rupan Babu approaching. He grumbled, you can't even shut your eyes. As Rupan Babu came in, he got up from his chair, and despite the fact that courtesy week he had long passed, he courteously shook hand. Rupan Babu sat down and immediately said, "A letter had been received by Ramadin. The dacoit have asked for 5,000 rupees. It says, oh, the last night of the dark fortnight, bring 5,000 rupees to the southern hill." The sub-inspector smiled and said, "Really, Sahib? This is too much. In the old days, dacoits used to cross river and mountain to collect money from your home. But now they expect you to leave your home and go and deliver the money to them." Rupan Babu said, "Yes, that's what I am saying. It is not dacoity, it's just bribery." The sub-inspector continued in the same tone, "Bribery, theft, dacoit. Now they have all become the same. It's communism." Rupan Babu said, "Further says the same thing." "What does he say?" "The same communism has taken over." They both laughed. Rupan Babu said, "No, I am not joking. Ramadin really had received this letter. That's why father has sent me here. He says so that if Ramadin is our opponent, he shouldn't be tormented like this. What he says is quite right, and whoever you want me to tell this to, I will tell it." Rupan Babu narrowed his deep-set eye and looked at the sub-inspector. The sub-inspector stared back at him and smiled. He said, "Don't worry, you will be on the dacoit as long as I am here." "Don't worry, there will be no dacoit as long as I am here." Rupan Babu said in a mild tone of the voice, "That I know. The letter is a forgery. Just inquire your own constable. Perhaps one of them wrote it." "No, that couldn't be. My constables are illiterate. Most can't even sign their own names." Rupan Babu was about to say something more, but the sub-inspector said, What's the hurry? For now, let Ramadin file his complaint. Let him show me the letter." For a while, both were silent. Then a thought occurred to the sub-inspector. "If you were to ask me the truth, I would say it seems that this bound up with education department." "How?" "And not just the education department with your college." Rupan Babu took this remark badly. "You are out to get my college. It appeared to me that some boy from your college has sent this letter to Ramadin. What do you think? In your eyes, students are responsible for all crime." Rupan Babu rebuked him. "If someone took poison in front of you and died, you people wouldn't even admit that was suicide. You would say that some student had poisoned him." "You are right, Rupan Babu. If it was necessary, I would even say that I am the follower of Bakhtavar Singh. Perhaps you didn't know that." After this, they started on one topic of conversation of the government servant, what government servant used to like and what they are like now. They touched on the subject of Bakhtavar Singh. The sub-inspector Bakhtavar Singh was returning home along one evening. Two badmash called Jagru and Mangru attacked him in the mango grove and beat him up. The story got out, and so Bakhtavar Singh entered a report of beating at the police station. The next day, the two badmash came and clasped his feet. They said, "Sir, you are our mother and father. If a child get angry and behaved badly with his parents, they forgive him." Bakhtavar Singh fulfilled his duty as a parent and forgave them. They filled their filial duty and made good arrangements for the Bakhtavar Singh in his old age. The matter was soon settled. Chapter 2. In the Shivpalganj police station, a man was pleading with the sub-inspector, his hands folded in supplication. "Several months have passed while you continuously delay matter. Please don't put off charging me any longer." The sub-inspector was half sitting, half reclining on a seat which must once have been some medical throne, but now that it was had been reduced to the status of an armchair. When he heard the request, the sub-inspector raised his head and said, "You will be charged eventually. What's the hurry? What calamity is descending upon you? The man sat down on a low stool near the armchair and said, For me, it is a calamity. If you charge me, then the trouble will be over. The sub-inspector started swearing under his breath. It soon became clear that what he meant to say was that the amount of the work he had to do with making him thoroughly fed up. There was so much work that he wasn't able to investigate crime, couldn't charge sheet case, couldn't give evidence in court. There was no much work that all work had come to standstill. The stool slid towards the armchair. The man said, Sir, my enemies have begun to say that there 3 gambling in Shivpalganj in broad daylight. An anonymous complaint has been sent to the superintendent and anyone. The agreement is that you charge me once a year. This year you are late with the charge. If you file it now, then this complaint will also be done with. For sitting on the rag of a rug lying on it, the pen stands, the pot of dried ink, the dusty register which were turning up at the corner. Everything looked several centuries old. For this police station, the fountain pen hadn't yet been invented. The only progress made in that direction was that pen were not made out of reeds. For this police station, the telephone was still a thing of future. By way of weapon, there were some ancient rifles which looked as though they had been used in revolt of 1857. Anyone for everyday use, the constable had bamboo staves, about which a poet had written, for crossing rivers and canals, for hitting dogs and animals. There were no more useful thing. For this police station, jeep did not exist. In their place too, a horse served as a sort of vehicle. It was loving cared by 2 or 3 village watchmen, and its ancestors must have performed the same role since the days of Mughal Empire. The common people had great expectations of sub-inspector and police station, dozen or so constables. If there was a burglary in some village 8 miles away, then in 250 and 300 villages which came under this police station, it was believed that one or other of the policemen would certainly witness it. If there was a decoy, then it was expected that they would get there ahead of the decoys. Because of this blind faith, no weapon other than 1 or 2 old rifles had been given to any village. The fear was that by handing out guns, the uncivilized and savage village would learn to use them and set about killing one another. River of blood would flow. As for a protection from dacoits, that was left to the magic performed by the sub-inspector and his dozen or so men. In short, the sub-inspector and his men were kept there on the understanding that they were no ordinary mortal but geniuses worthy of being conjured by the Aladdin lamp. The British installed them in 1947, turned to their homeland. Gradually, people began to find out that sub-inspector and his constables were not jinns but men, and the sort of men who themselves rub their lamp day and night in the hope of forcing a jinn to come out. Chapter 1. The edge of a town, beyond it the ocean of the Indian countryside, and there on the edge of the town stood a truck. As soon as you saw it, you could tell that the sole purpose of its creation had been to rape the roads of India. Like reality, the truck had many aspects. From one point of view, the police could say that it was standing in the middle of the road. Looked at another way, the driver could say that it was on the side of the road. According to the dictates of the current fashion, the driver had opened the right-hand door so that it hung out like a bird's wing. This engaged the truck's appearance and made it impossible for any other vehicle to pass. On one side of the road there was a petrol station. On the other, shop constructed of bit of the rotting and rusting thatched. Would local know how the various items of assorted junk. At first sight, it was clear that the shops were too numerous to count. and nearly all of them offered one of the favorite drink of the Indian masses, which was prepared from dust, dirt, tea leaves which had already been used several times, boiling water and so forth. The shop also stocked the sweets which battled valiantly day and night against the onslaught of rain, dust storm, flies, and mosquitoes. The sweets demonstrated the manual dexterity and scientific expertise of our native one. They showed that even if we don't know how to make a decent razor blade, we are still on the only one in the world who can turn rubbish into the tastiest of the snakes. The truck's driver and cleaner were standing in front of the shop drinking tea. Ranganath spotted the truck from the distance and immediately hastened his step. Today, the railway had deceived him. He had left home thinking the local passenger train would be 2 hours late as usual, but it had only been an hour and a half late and had left without him. Having contributed to the literature of the complaints book and made himself a laughing stock in the eyes of railway staff, he had left the station. Now, as he walked down the road towards the truck, he began to smile. When he reached it, the driver and the cleaner were still sipping their tea. Glancing around aimlessly and containing his smile, Ranganath asked the driver in a disinterested way, "Driver Sahib, is the truck going in direction of Shopalganj?" The driver had his tea to drink and the lady as shopkeeper to look at, paying little attention to Ranganath. "Will you take me with you? I will get out there at the 50th mile. I have to go to Shopalganj." The driver had his tea to drink and the lady shopkeeper to look at. Paying little attention to Ranganath, he said, "It is. If you take me with you, I will get out at the 15th mile. I have to go to Shopalganj." The driver assessed all the possibilities of the lady shopkeeper in one glance and then turned his gaze upon Ranganath. What a sight! At the great god Vishnu stand head to toe like a pure lotus flower. So Ranganath stood head to toe, a vision of white khadi cotton, the homespun cloth popularized by Mahatma Gandhi. He wore a khadi cap, shirt and pajama. Over his shoulders hung a bag of the kind used by Gandhian land gift movement. In his hand was a leather attache case. The driver saw him and saw amazed. Then he thought of a moment and said, "Please take your seat, sir. We will leave right away." The truck shuddered into life and set off, freeing themselves after a while from the twisting, chaotic grasp of the town. They came upon a clear and empty road. Here the driver was able to get into top gear for the first time, but the gear lever kept slipping into the neutral every 100 yards. And since the driver had his foot on the accelerator, the shuddering increased as his speed of the truck decreased. Ranganath said, "Driver Sahib, your gearbox is exactly like our government." The driver accepted his citation of merit with a smile. Ranganath tried to make his statement more intelligible. "No matter how often you put it on top gear, every few yards it slips and goes back into its old rut." The driver laughed. "You have said something very deep, sir." Next time he went into top gear, he lifted his leg to an angle of about 90 degrees and held the gear pressed under his thigh. Ranganath wanted to say that the same technique was indeed to run the country, but thinking that this would be a deeper statement, still he remained silent. The driver meanwhile turned his thigh to its proper place, put a long stick against the gear and wedged the other end under the dashboard. The truck kept up speed. Terrified at the sight of it, cyclists, pedestrians, horse-drawn cart and all other vehicles for the several furlongs ahead drove off the road. To judge from the speed at which the vehicle fled, it seems they thought the truck was no truck but a wave of fire, a typhoon from the Bay of Bengal, some foul-mouthed official unleashed on the public or a gang of wild pindaris. Ranganath thought that they should have had an announcement made in advance to warn people to keep all their livestock and children at home as a truck had just left the town. The driver asked, "Tell me, sir, how are you? It's long time. It's since you have been into country." Rangnath smiled encouragingly, this attempt at civility. "What are you doing these days, sir?" Digging up grass. The driver laughed. By accident, he nearly ran over a naked 10-year-old boy. Safe, the boy dropped down onto a small bridge like a wounded house lizard falling from the ceiling. This had no effect on the driver, putting his toe even further down on the acceleration and laughing. He said, "What a thing to say. Go on, sir, tell me. What do you mean?" "I told you I'm digging up grass. In English, you call it research. Last year I did my MA. This year I have started research." The driver was smiling as if he were listening to tales from the Thousands and One Nights. "So, sir, why are you going to Shopalganj? My mother's brother lived there. I have been ill and I'm going to stay in the country for a while recovery." The driver laughed for rather a long time. "What a tale you have made up, sir." Ranganath gave him a doubtful look and asked, "What's made up about it?" At this innocent question, the driver rocked around with mirth. "What thing are you saying? Very well then, forget it. Tell me, how is Mittal Sahib is? What happened to the murder case in the police lockup?" Ranganath was completely unnerved. Choking, he said, "But how could I know who Mittal Sahib is?" The driver put a brake on his laughter. The truck slowed down. He took a close look at Ranganath. "You don't know Mittal Sahib?" "No." "Jain Sahib?" "No." The driver sped out of the window and asked in a clever voice, "You don't work for the CID then?" Irritated, Ranganath said, "CID? What on earth do you mean?" The driver let out a long sigh and began to examine the road ahead intently. Some bullock carts were traveling along it. In accordance with the popular principle of stretching out your legs, wherever you get the chance, the driver laid on top of their carts, asleep and their faces covered. The bullocks, not on their own initiative but the result of long practice, quietly pulled the cart down road. The scene merited comparison with the bovine public and is a lethargic later. The Ranganath hadn't the courage to say anything. He had been upset by the remark about CID. The driver blew first his rubber horn and then another horn, which despite its three musical tones was truly terrifying. The bullock carts proceeded on their way. The driver was pushing the truck on at top speed and seemed to be about to flying over the cars. But as he got closer, he seemed suddenly to realize that he was in a truck, not a helicopter. He braked. The stick which has been wedged against the dashboard fell down. The gear changed and the truck squeezed past the cart, alone touching them. Further on, driver spoke to Ranganath with contempt. "If you are not CID, then how come you were wearing khadi?" Ranganath had been put in low spirit of these aggressive questions, but he treated this tone as a normal inquiry and answered simply, "Everyone wears khadi these days. Come off it. No sensible man does. Only politicians, plainclothes men and fools." He opened the window, sped and changed into a top gear. The personality cult surrounding Ranganath was at an end. For a while he sat quietly. Then he began to whistle. The driver nudged him with his elbow and said, "Look here, sit down. This is no place for hymn singing and such like." Ranganath shut up. Driver was annoyed. "This gear keeps on slipping. It goes into neutral. What are you staring at? Grab hold of it and keep it in place." A few minutes later, he said in the same tone, "Not like that. Like this. Keep the pressure up and hold it properly." For some time a horn had been blowing behind the truck. Ranganath had heard it, but the driver was paying no attention. After a while, the cleaner, who was traveling in the back, hung round the side of the truck and began to tap on the window by driver's head. In the language of truck walas, this action certainly had some dreadful importance because the driver slowed down immediately and pulled the truck over to the left-hand side of the road. The horn belonged to a station wagon, the sort of station wagon which, thanks to foreign aid, is used the hundred of the progress of the country and which can be seen on any road at any time. The station wagon passed the truck on the right, slowed down, and khaki-colored arms stretched out to signal the truck to stop. Both vehicles drew to a halt. An officer like peon and a peon like officer stepped down from the station wagon. Two constables in khaki uniform also got out. Immediately they began to rob and loot in the style of the Pindari dacoits. Someone seized the driver's license, someone else the registration card, someone began to tap the rear view mirror, someone else blew the horn. They bobbled the running road, switched on the headlight, ranged the bell at the back of the truck. Whatever they looked at was defective. Whatever they touched, they found something wrong with it. In this way, in 4 minutes, those 4 men found 40 faults with the truck, and standing underneath a tree, they began to discuss the treatment which was to be meted out to the enemy. Ranganath could only make out that the stories of the principles of karma and poetic justice were true. The truck was being checked, and God was taking his revenge on the driver for his insult to the Ranganath. He remained where he was, but in the middle of all this discussion, the driver found an opportunity to say, "Sir, please get down. What is the need to sit there holding the gear now?" Ranganath got down and went to stand under another tree. Under the first one, the driver and the checking party were discussing every single point of the truck in detail. As he watched, the discussion shifted from the parts of the truck to the general condition and economic chaos facing the country, and in short time, the individual present had broken into a small subcommittee standing under separate trees. They began to ponder each issue in their capacity and experts. After a lot of discussion, a sort of open session began under one tree, and soon it became apparent that the seminar was coming to an end. Finally, Ranganath heard the nasal voice of the officer. "Well, Ashfaq Mia, what's your opinion? Should we let him off?" the peon said. "What else can you do, sir? How long can we go on drawing up charges? If there were only a couple of faults, then we could charge him." A constable said it would be tomorrow morning by the time we finish making out the charges sheet. After taking around the points, the officer said, "Okay, Banta Singh, you can go. We have let you off." The officer had been standing under a tree watching Ranganath for some time. Lighting a cigarette, he came towards him. When he was close, he asked, "You were in the truck too?" "Yes." He didn't take any fare off you, did he?" "No." The officer said, "I guess as much by looking at your clothes, but it's my duty to check." To annoy with him, Ranganath said, "This isn't real homespun khadi, it's milk cloth." The other officer replied definitely, "Ah, Sahib, khadi is khadi. What's the difference between real and imitation?" When the officer left, the driver came up with him. The peon, the driver said, "Just give us 2 rupees, will you, sir?" Turning his face away, Ranganath answered harshly, "What do you mean? You should give me. Why should I give you money?" The driver took the peon's hand and said, please come with me." As he moved off, he said, "Ranganath, I got checked just because of you, and you speak to me like this when I am in trouble. Is this how you have been educated? The present education system is like a pariah bitch lying in the road which anyone can kick." The driver, as he went on his way, attacked it with a sentence and headed towards the truck with the clerk. Ranganath saw that evening was closing, and in his attached case was in trucks. Shivpalganj was still 5 miles away, and he needed people needed people's goodwill. He approached the truck slowly. The driver of the station wagon was blowing his horn repeatedly to call back the peon. Rangnath tried to give the driver 2 rupees. The driver said, "If you are giving now, then give it to the elderly Sahab. What will I do with your money?" As he spoke, he began to sound like those religious ascetics who never touch money themselves but only tell others that their money is nothing but the dirt of their hands. The peon pocketed the money, took a last puff at his beedi, threw it half lit, step more and less on Ranganath's pajama and set off towards the station wagon. When he departed, the driver started the truck, went into top gear just as before, and gave Rangnath the lever to hold. Then, suddenly and without any reason, he puckered his lips and began to whistle a song from a Hindi film. Rangnath listened in silence. Sometime later, he began to distinguish bundle like objects in the twilight on both sides of the road. These were women sitting in row, talking contentedly at the same time relieving themselves. Below the road were a heap of rubbish, and their stench was making an evening breeze below sluggishness of a pregnant woman. From some distance away came the sound of barking dogs. Certains of a smoke drifted in front of Rangnath's eyes. All this meant there was no denying that they had come to a village Shivpalganj.